The day before my son's wedding, I thought everything was going to be perfect. I thought I was ready to celebrate, to smile, to be proud. But I had no idea that one person in that family was planning the cruelest betrayal I could ever imagine. My daughter-in-law, Leela. She came into my life like a shadow in the night, silently, quietly, and without a single word, she replaced my shampoo with hair-removing gel. Not only that, she took a pair of scissors and cut my wedding dress into pieces, making sure I couldn't even show up for the wedding I dreamed about for my whole life. That night, I took my shower completely unaware of the trap, went to sleep thinking everything was normal, and when I woke up the next morning, I looked into the mirror and screamed. I screamed because the reflection staring back at me was unrecognizable. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. I'm Miranda, and this is my story. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My hair, once thick and full, now looked patchy, brittle and sparse in places, some strands literally falling out in my hands as I tried to brush it. My wedding dress, which I had spent months planning, choosing, and sewing for this moment, lay in tatters on the bed, the scissors marks cruel and precise. I felt the weight of humiliation pressing down on me like a physical blow. And the worst part? No one else knew. No one else had seen what she had done. To the world, I was just Miranda, the mother of the bride, excited, ready to celebrate. But inside, I felt violated, mocked, and powerless. At first, I thought maybe Leela had meant no harm, but deep down, I knew better. That silent, calculated act, it wasn't a mistake. And then I remembered how she had been looking at me in the weeks leading up to the wedding, not with warmth, not with friendliness, but with subtle smirks, small comments disguised as jokes, eyes flicking over me as if she were marking her territory. I dismissed it. I wanted to believe she loved Ethan, that she respected me, that she was just nervous about her new life. But now, staring at my reflection, I realized I had been blind. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush to Ethan and demand answers. But I knew it wouldn't help. He would never believe me. Not completely. He had always seen Leela as perfect, as the woman he loved. And I had to figure this out for myself. I had to take back some control. I had to make her pay, but in a way that she would never forget. The first step was patience. I couldn't act immediately. Leela had made herself invisible in her cruelty, and acting too soon would only make me look paranoid. I had to gather evidence, understand her patterns, her vulnerabilities, the way she hid her nastiness beneath a perfect smile. I started paying attention to small things, little habits, the way she spoke when she thought no one was listening, how she interacted with staff, how she subtly manipulated Ethan and the rest of the family. Every detail mattered. And the more I watched, the more I realized just how deep her deceit ran. She wasn't just jealous of me. She despised me. She wanted to take everything I had built, my respect, my pride, my place in Ethan's life, and destroy it, quietly, surgically, with precision. I started keeping notes, documenting incidents that seemed minor at first, a thrown look, a misplaced item, a casual insult disguised as humor. But when I look back at everything, the pattern was undeniable. She had been undermining me for months, maybe even years, all while pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I had always believed that confrontation was the best way to solve problems, but this wasn't a problem that could be solved with words. No, this required strategy, patience, and timing. I began planning carefully. I mapped out her daily routines, figured out who she trusted, who could be manipulated, who could be persuaded to help without realizing it. I started small, testing the waters, planting tiny hints, watching her reaction, gauging her temperament, and slowly, step by step, I built my plan. It wasn't easy. Every day I had to maintain the facade of calm, of normality. I smiled at her, complimented her, played the role of the oblivious mother, all while my mind ran through scenarios of revenge. It was exhausting. Sometimes I would lie awake at night, wondering if I was becoming as cruel as she was. But then I remembered the moment I looked in the mirror, the shock, the betrayal, and I pushed those doubts aside. I had to finish what I started. I had to take back my dignity. Days passed, and life around the wedding seemed to continue normally, as if nothing had happened. But for me, every moment was a study in vigilance. I watched Leela carefully, observing the subtle ways she controlled the people around her, the way she twisted conversations to make herself look innocent, while quietly undermining everyone else. The smiles she wore were masks, each one hiding malice, sharpened like a knife. She didn't just want me gone from the wedding, she wanted to erase me from Ethan's life entirely, to make me feel small, powerless, humiliated.
I started keeping a journal, a record of everything. Small incidents, offhand remarks, inconsistencies, patterns in her behavior. It was obsessive, yes, but I needed it. I needed to understand her fully before making a move. And as I watched, I began noticing things I hadn't before. The way she manipulated family friends, the way she subtly encouraged my son to doubt me over trivial matters, the way she planted seeds of tension between me and my closest allies. Every action was calculated, designed to isolate me, to weaken me emotionally before she struck. Then came the first test. Leela had a friend visiting, a woman named Selena, who I had met briefly at a dinner months ago. Selena was charming, warm, and completely unaware of Leela's cruelty. I watched as Leela subtly turned every conversation, every compliment, into an opportunity to mock me behind my back, all while keeping her voice sweet and innocent. Selena laughed at everything, completely missing the venom in Leela's words. I felt a flicker of rage, but also clarity. This wasn't just malice, this was arrogance. Leela believed no one would ever see her for what she truly was, and that arrogance, that would be her downfall. I began testing boundaries. I would drop small hints, just enough for Leela to notice. A comment about my own awareness, a passing remark about seeing things clearly, a subtle glance that let her know I wasn't blind. Each time, I watched her reaction carefully, noting how she processed the threat or the illusion of threat. She was cautious now, calculating. I could see the tiny cracks forming in her perfect mask. She had underestimated me, and that was the first step in turning the tables. But the real challenge was Ethan. I couldn't let him know what I was doing, not yet. He was hopelessly enamored with Leela, convinced of her perfection. If he knew I suspected her, he would automatically side with her, dismissing me as paranoid or overreacting. So I kept up appearances, smiled, acted as if nothing was wrong, while my mind ran endless simulations of every possible outcome. Every mistake, every misstep could ruin everything. Then came the slip. The first real break in her armor. Leela had left her phone unattended while helping with some writing arrangements, and I caught sight of a conversation. Not malicious at first glance, but when I read closely, the picture was clear. She had been planning her sabotage for months. Everything, the shampoo, the dress, even certain interactions with staff and family had been premeditated. She wasn't just a cruel person, she was meticulous. That was terrifying, but also empowering. Finally, I had leverage. I had proof. And with proof, I could start building my plan in earnest. From that moment, every action became part of the game. I didn't just observe anymore, I orchestrated. I tested the reliability of the staff, planting little seeds, seeing who could be swayed, who would act unwittingly to my advantage. I noticed Leela's dependence on certain helpers, certain family members, and I began nudging them subtly, manipulating them without them realizing it. Every small victory built momentum. I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time: control. But she wasn't easy. Leela had instincts. She sensed changes, even before she could pinpoint them. There were moments when I thought she suspected me, the way her eyes would flick toward me, calculating, sharp, almost predatory. I had to act with extreme caution. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. I had to be patient, bide my time, and let her arrogance blind her further. Then came the moment that truly solidified my plan. I realized that Leela's obsession with perfection, with maintaining an image, was her greatest weakness. She couldn't stand being exposed, couldn't tolerate embarrassment. That flaw, that tiny crack in her armor, became my weapon. Every observation I had made, every subtle manipulation, every careful note I had taken would now converge into a single, devastating strategy. I began practicing, in my mind, every step of the confrontation that would come. I imagined the look on her face as her secrets unraveled. I pictured her confusion, her frantic attempts to twist the narrative, her disbelief as the truth became undeniable. And I knew that when the time came, it would be flawless. I had waited, I had planned, and I had the advantage. The countdown to her downfall had begun, and she didn't even know the clock was ticking. I started my plan like I was threading a needle in the dark. Small, precise movements. Nothing flashy, nothing loud that would alert her. The first real move was to turn her own friends into unwitting witnesses. Selena, the charming one, was easy, warm, talkative, and embarrassingly gullible. I invited her for tea to talk wedding details, watched her settle into the living room with that careless smile, and let the conversation drift toward Leela in a casual way. I didn't accuse. I asked questions instead, the kind that would open a door without slamming it shut. Does Leela ever seem nervous around me? Does she ever joke about how she likes things done? Small, harmless prompts. Selena obliged with laughs and anecdotes, and in the gaps between her stories, I dropped almost accidentally the smallest hints that might make her remember more closely than she had before. I didn't push, I only nudged. But later, when I needed her memory, those nudges would matter. Next, I worked on the staff. The caterer, the florist, the woman who was in charge of my hair that morning. Staff loyalty can be brittle. People want to do their jobs and go home, not be dragged into family feuds. I started by complimenting them, treating them like part of my team and listening when they spoke. I learned Joe, the caterer, liked quiet validation and was terrified of being blamed if something went wrong. I learned Nadia, the wedding planner, hated surprises. Small favors, a polite note, a sincere thank you, those gestures bought me time and attention. When the time came, I would need someone who would remember a face, a scent, an odd bottle in a trash can. I was collecting those small things like a detective collecting fibers. The hardest part was keeping Ethan in the dark. He was everywhere and nowhere, obsessed with final checks, calling vendors, making last-minute jokes about his nerves. If he had even the vaguest inkling that I suspected Leela, he would close ranks and I'd be the one looking unstable. So I played the role I always had, the doting mother, slightly overexcited, peppy even, the one who cried when she heard the song they chose for their first dance. Every time Leela tossed me a poisoned compliment, I took it and smiled. The cost was wearing a mask, but that mask bought me time. There were close calls that almost made me break my own plan. Once, Leela left her purse in the guest room after an errand. I had rehearsed what to do 100 times. I told myself I wouldn't snoop, but the phone was the pivot point that gave me the leverage I needed, and my curiosity is a stubborn animal. I opened the purse like someone opening a book I never meant to read. There was nothing dramatic in the wallet, a lipstick, a receipt, a hair tie. My hairs hovered over the phone, and for a second I considered backing away. Then I told myself this was necessary. I told myself I was protecting myself. I unlocked the device with a code she'd left carelessly in a note, another advantage of being present and discreet. The messages were clinical and calm, the kind of conversations where cruelty hides under small logistics. Suppliers mentioned, names dropped, a plan repeated in fragments. There it was again, the pattern confirmed. I felt a guilty rush, like the first sip of wine after swearing off it, but with it came clarity. I didn't screenshot. I didn't need to. The memory of those words lived with me now, indelible. Leela had instincts, though. A few days later, she nearly caught me in the laundry room, where I'd planted one of my little tests. A bottle of premium conditioner I'd switched with a harmless, cheap brand to see who would notice. She passed by, paused, and tilted her head like a wolf hearing soft steps. Her eyes skimmed the bottle, and then for the briefest whisper of time met mine with a look that made my stomach drop. I smiled, loud and bright, and said, "Oh, thank God we sorted out the hair trial. The stylist was brilliant." Her jaw tightened, but she laughed. That moment felt razor thin. If she had asked more, if she had connected the dots, the whole fragile web I'd been spinning could have unraveled. Instead, she walked away, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I began to stage the narrative without ever appearing to stage it. I would accidentally leave copies of her messages where the right people would find them, not in a way that could be traced back to me, but in ways that would put pressure on her inner circle. Once, I left an envelope for Ethan on the kitchen table with a typed, "For your eyes only," that contained nothing but blank paper and a sticky note. "Think about what you don't know." He laughed at the drama, folded it up and tucked it in his pocket. That laugh was a small victory. It kept attention on the idea that something was off without pointing fingers. People began to notice the tension. Conversations that had been easy became careful. Leela's laughter sounded a touch too sharp, like a knife being tested on a finger. Then I used the one thing Leela feared most, exposure. She presented herself as someone who could handle scandal with a smile, but in private, she folded like tissue. I started to plant seeds about her vanity, casually referencing a misunderstanding that could be embarrassing. Nothing criminal, nothing violent, but the kind of thing that would stain the polished image she cultivated. A rumor about a supplier who'd been paid late, a question about why she'd insisted on controlling the music list, a casual mention of a glass vial I had seen in a trash bin by the guest room, a prop, I implied, for a beauty routine she preferred secret. These were small arrows, not lethal, but they hit the soft places. It felt like walking a tightrope when men I trusted began to act unpredictably. My brother, Mateo, who had always liked Leela for her charm, suddenly seemed distant. He sent me a text one late night. "Are you sure about this? Don't do something you'll regret." I stared at those words until the screen blurred, wondering if I'd misread every signal, every joke. But the next afternoon, Mateo met me in the garden with a look that said he'd decided to listen. He told me, quietly, that he'd overheard Leela on the phone, a conversation where she had laughed about making the mother disappear. Hearing him say it out loud was chilling, a cold confirmation that I wasn't misremembering or imagining slights. Yet even with that, the plan had to stay slow. Hasty justice is messy justice.
My strategy hinged on timing. Expose enough to create doubt, but not so much that people would circle the wagons.
So I started to introduce controlled witnesses, people who could corroborate details without appearing coached. Selena, who loved gossip almost as much as she loved being charming, became useful. She remembered the laugh in Lila's voice when she joked about hacks that would get her to the altar without interference. Joe, the caterer, mentioned seeing Lila near the guest rooms late at night, checking linens with exaggerated care. Small things, but corroborated, they began to form a pattern. There were nights I felt like a criminal planner instead of a hurt mother, mapping exit routes, replaying conversations, imagining phone calls where I would remain calm and unblinking. I rehearsed my face for the day of reckoning, neutral, composed, the hollowed-out shell of someone who had endured and won. I hated that I'd become a strategist, but hatred was a powerful tutor. At the same time, there were moments of real tenderness. Ethan bringing me coffee in the chaos, hugging me when everyone else was busy, oblivious to the war under his family's roof. Those moments reminded me what I was fighting for, not just revenge, but a place at my son's life table that hadn't been quietly kicked away. Then came a tense afternoon when everything nearly collapsed. Lila came into the kitchen humming, put her hand on my shoulder, and said with a smile, "Everything okay, Mom? You look tired." I felt the old shame and wanted to dissolve into sobs. Instead, I choked out, "I'm fine, darling," and returned her smile. At the same time, my phone buzzed with a message from Nadia. "Meet me at the salon in 10. I stepped out onto the porch with my heart in my throat and for a wild second feared I'd been discovered, imagined cameras, imagined betrayal. But Nadia simply handed me a folded napkin with a scribbled note. "She's nervous. She keeps checking the guest rooms." I almost laughed aloud with relief. The pieces were moving as I'd hoped. She was cracking. The tension mounted like a coiled spring. Each confirmation, each discovered message, each awkward conversation sharpened toward the moment I had been building for weeks. I was close enough to taste it. The reveal, the humiliation, the small, precise justice. Every step felt dangerous, but failure no longer seemed unbearable. I had gone too far down this path to turn back now. The next days felt like living inside a held breath. Every hour stretched thin, every smile a practiced lift of muscle. I could feel the net tightening around Lila, and every creak in the house sounded like a step toward the reveal. I started arranging small scenes where her reactions would be caught naturally. A vase moved a fraction of an inch, a cup left just within sight, little anomalies that would make her glance, hesitate, and reveal herself in those half seconds when people are most honest. It was petty, maybe, but I had learned that cruelty often reveals itself in petty things. One evening, I invited a handful of people over under the pretense of final dress fittings and last-minute toasts. Nothing flashy, just tea, a few cookies, and the kind of quiet gathering that lets gossip spread its wings. Ethan was distracted with a vendor call, Mateo pretended to be busy with work, and Selena arrived in one of those dresses that made laughter easy. I let the conversation drift, steering it gently until the subject landed on wedding day mishaps. I told a small, half-true story about a mysterious stain on a rehearsal dinner napkin and watched Lila's smile twitch. The room didn't know it yet, but the questions had been sown. I also began to turn Lila's allies into unwitting instruments of truth. I had a long talk with Joe, the caterer, under the pretense of discussing extra hors d'oeuvres. He was nervous, fidgety, but when I asked casually about the night shifts he was supposed to keep, he mentioned with no prompting that he'd seen someone, A girl with that high laugh moving through guest rooms after midnight. He didn't know why it mattered, but when I later described the laugh to others, small nods of recognition came back. It was like building a mosaic out of tiny, ugly tiles. From a distance, the picture would make sense. But manipulation isn't only about collecting facts, it's about leverage, and for leverage, you need pressure. I found a way to increase the pressure without appearing to apply it. I began to leak inconsistencies into the family's orbit. An offhand question to Ethan about how well everyone knew each other. A comment to Mateo about how easy it is for secrets to fester. People started whispering, and whispers are cruel to the guilty. Lila's manner changed. She became less fluid, more watchful, as if expecting a storm that only she could not see. There were darker nights where doubt crept in like fog. One such night, after a long day of rehearsals, I sat alone in my kitchen with the tattered remnant of the dress folded neatly on the counter. It looked pitiful there, a white confession. I thought about what I had done, about the lies I'd let slip, the manipulations I'd encouraged, the people I'd drawn into my orbit. Was I saving myself or sinking myself deeper into something I might regret? I touched the torn lace and felt ridiculous and fierce at once. My son deserved to have his mother there on his wedding day, proud, not erased. If the path to that truth required careful cruelty, then I would walk it. I told myself that until sleep took me. The plan escalated when I found an opening in the one place Lila thought was guaranteed, her social circle. There was a luncheon at a neighbor's house the week before the wedding, the kind of event where appearances are everything. Lila loved those rooms. She wore herself like armor there. I made it my point to be there too, unassuming and soft-spoken, letting others chatter while I listened. Mid-lunch, I let a well-placed question drop about bridesmaids' duties, about how much control one woman should have over a wedding. It sounded like etiquette, like concern, but it nudged conversations in a way that made people recall small, odd favors Lila had asked. The late-night runs, the insistence on supervising certain rooms. By dinner, there were looks exchanged, a tightening of faces. Lila's smile at the table was brittle as spun sugar. Then came the day I'd been waiting for, not the wedding day itself, but a rehearsal when the family would be gathered, phones down, attention supposed to be on the vows and the sound of the piano in the corner. I arranged subtly for Selena to remember something in front of others. A laugh she'd heard, a phrase Lila had used that hinted at the plan to keep me away. Selena hadn't meant to be a witness when she first left the house. She only followed a thread of conversation. But once she spoke, the cascade began. You could see it happen. Faces shifting, hands tightening around cups, eyes darting. Ethan looked puzzled, then angry, then protective. I watched him process the possibility that his perfect Lila might not be as flawless as he thought. The confrontation that followed was messy and human. Lila first tried to charm, to explain away the memories people now pulled from their pockets. She gestured wildly, laughed, cried crocodile tears, and accused others of misunderstanding. My heart hammered in my chest while she performed. It was almost theatrical, and in a way, she had always been a great actress. But the facts had been sewn too carefully to be swept away. Joe corroborated seeing her near the guest rooms that night. Nadia confessed to hearing strange instructions about ensuring certain people weren't present. Mateo, stoic, admitted he'd heard the phrase that finally tied it together: make the mother disappear. Ethan's voice, when it came, was raw with betrayal. He demanded answers, and the air tasted like iron. Leela's defense fell apart like a paper set to flame. She tried to shift blame, then to gaslight, then to beg. But the family had shifted. Doubt had replaced the naive certainty that had once cocooned her. She searched my face for a sign of triumph and found something calmer. Not glee, not malice, but a tired, hard-earned steadiness. I hadn't wanted to humiliate her for pleasure. I had wanted truth. When the truth was finally allowed to sit in the room, its weight was heavier than I expected. Leela's voice cracked. For the first time since she'd walked into our lives, she looked small. Afterwards, there were consequences that unfolded in quiet, bureaucratic ways. Apologies were demanded, offers of mediation floated, and Leela retreated into a shell of hurt that most people didn't question. Some relationships shifted permanently, others healed with time and explanation. Ethan, flung between love and betrayal, spent a week in silence that felt like winter. I sat with him in that cold, held him when he finally let out the sound of a man realizing he'd been deceived. And we talked, not with fury, but with the heavy honesty of two people who had been forced to see who they truly were. And me? I walked a strange line between victory and exhaustion. The satisfaction I felt at the unmasking was fierce, sweet, but it was braided with fatigue and something like grief for what had been lost, for the family's ease, for the uncomplicated moments that now would always hold a shadow. Revenge had not been a clean wound. It was a long, jagged process that left both the guilty and the innocent scarred. Yet beneath all of that, I felt a renewed sense of self. I had refused to be erased, and in choosing not to vanish, I had reclaimed a place at the table. If you were listening in that room with us, what would you have done? Would you have pushed for public exposure, or tried to quietly mend things? Would you have waited as long as I did, or acted in the heat of the moment? The questions lingered, and they still do, even now. After that rehearsal confrontation, the air in the house felt permanently altered. Leela no longer moved through rooms with that smug, effortless grace. Every glance she cast was measured, cautious, like a predator realizing the prey had learned to fight. It wasn't instant satisfaction that warmed me, but a slow, deep relief, the kind that comes when control has been wrested back one deliberate action at a time. I kept my eyes open, not out of suspicion, but to witness the consequences of truth when it finally lands. The wedding day arrived, and it was nothing like the nightmare I'd imagined. I wore a dress that hugged me perfectly, a new choice, elegant but understated. My hair, though still recovering, was pinned and styled in a way that made me feel powerful, not fragile. I smiled at the reflection and realized for the first time in weeks that I recognized the woman looking back. I was not just the mother of the groom. I was a survivor. And I carried the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing the storm had passed and I had walked through it whole. Ethan was nervous, as any groom would be, but there was an edge of gratitude in his eyes when he caught mine. He had seen Leela's slip-ups, her manipulation, and though he struggled with anger and disbelief, he now understood why I had kept so much hidden. He hugged me before the ceremony, whispering, "Thank you for protecting me, even when I didn't see it." I didn't cry then. I held my composure. But inside, a tide of emotion surged, fierce and cleansing. Leela, for her part, attempted to move through the day with dignity, but dignity is fragile when built on lies. Every small misstep, a dropped napkin, a misremembered instruction, a flinch in her voice, was noticed by those whose eyes were open. She tried to charm, but charm had no purchase anymore. The subtle gossip I had sown, the witnesses quietly corroborating details, the pattern that had been laid bare, all converged into a social pressure that made her smile brittle and her posture tense. And through it all, I observed without cruelty, simply noting the natural course of consequences when deceit meets daylight. During the ceremony, I sat quietly, hands folded, heart racing, yet serene. The words exchanged, the vows spoken, the tears shed. Everything was real, raw, and honest. I looked around at the faces of our family and friends and felt the culmination of weeks of planning, patience, and emotional endurance. This wasn't about humiliation for pleasure. This was about reclaiming what had been stolen, my dignity, my voice, my place in Ethan's life. And seeing that reclamation manifest in real time was more powerful than any immediate revenge could have been. After the wedding, small confrontations naturally unfolded. Leela attempted to explain herself to family members, but explanations sounded hollow in the wake of documented actions and corroborated observations. The tension she had cultivated for months collapsed under its own weight. People who had once been charmed by her elegance now saw her calculation, and the trust she had assumed as her shield was gone. She tried to redirect blame, even subtly, but I had already demonstrated patience, strategy, and quiet resolve, things that could not be hurried or circumvented. I remember standing outside, taking a quiet moment away from the crowd. The night air was cool, scented faintly with spring blooms, and I allowed myself to breathe. The weight of betrayal, the humiliation, the endless hours of planning and watching, it all felt lighter. I realized that the revenge I had carried out wasn't cruel or petty. It was justice, measured in time, observation, and truth. Leela's exposure was complete, but mine was personal. I had taken back my place, my sense of power, and my dignity. There were moments of reflection after the wedding, quiet talks with Ethan and Mateo, even with Selena about the lessons learned. I never gossiped or bragged. The story of Leela's actions and their consequences was told only where it mattered, in measured doses to restore understanding, not to incite drama. And I felt a strange, comforting satisfaction in that. The world had witnessed what mattered, but I had retained my dignity, and that balance felt like victory. Looking back, I realize how much patience mattered, how observation, subtlety, and timing can turn even the most calculated betrayal into a revelation of truth. The pain, the humiliation, the nights spent planning and fearing exposure, all of it shaped me. It taught me resilience, strategy, and the quiet power of endurance. Leela had thought she could erase me, diminish me, make me invisible. But by the end, it was she who was unmasked, exposed, and contained. And I walked through it all with my integrity intact, my role as mother, as witness, as protector, stronger than ever. So I ask you, if you had been in my shoes, facing betrayal so intimate and deliberate, would you have waited? Would you have planned quietly and let time reveal the truth, or acted in the heat of the moment? Revenge isn't about malice alone. It's about reclaiming what's yours without losing yourself. And in my case, patience and precision were the instruments that allowed justice to unfold. I survived betrayal, I endured, and I reclaimed my place. And that, more than anything, is the story I hope you take with you.